The auctioneer had given up on the last pen before he ever reached it, and he said so out loud, which is how Hollis Barrow came to own 40 head of starving Apache horses for $80 on a gray morning in March. 40 head, such as they are, the man said, and did not trouble to lift his voice the way he had for the mules. Agency stock, seized lawful off the band up on the Cibecue last October, and wintered here at government expense, which the government has lately decided it is finished paying. Nobody laughed, because nobody standing in that yard thought there was anything funny in it, and nobody bid either, because there were two kinds of men at that fence, and neither kind wanted those horses. The first kind looked into the pen and saw 40 skeletons with hide stretched over them, ribs a man could count at 100 yards, hip bones standing up like tent poles under a wet canvas, and 3 head down in the churned mud at the back that were not going to rise again without somebody's hands under them. The second kind did not look at the horses at all. They looked past the horses at who had owned them, and they would not have taken that herd for nothing with money attached. Because a man who buys Apache ponies in that territory in that year has told everyone he knows something about himself that he cannot afterward untell. $80, Hollis said. He did not raise his hand, and he did not raise his voice. And afterward there were men who swore they had not heard him say it at all, and only understood what had happened when the auctioneer's head came around. There was a silence then of the particular kind that happens when 40 men have all decided something at once, without any of them saying it. Rule Stagg, who ran cattle on the section adjoining Barrow's east line, and who had been leaning on the top rail with his arms folded, unfolded them. "Say that again, Hollis." $80, Hollis said. $2 a head. He's not going to get another offer, and you know it. And the alternative is the boneyard man out of Silver City, and I've seen what he pays, and I've seen what he does with them after. They're Apache horses. They're horses, Hollis said, and they're starving, and there's grass on my east range that nothing's eaten since my wife died, and I've got a well that didn't fail in the dry year when everything else in this basin did. That's the whole of my thinking on it, and you're welcome to all of it. The auctioneer, who wanted his dinner and had a train to meet, brought his hand down flat on the rail and called it sold before anyone could talk Hollis out of it, or talk himself into a better price. And the thing was finished. It took Hollis and 2 hired boys the better part of the afternoon to get the 3 down horses up onto their feet, and one of them they had to lift with a sling rigged off the corral post, and when she finally stood, she stood shaking with her head down almost to the mud and did not move for a long while. And it was while Hollis was standing there, with his hand flat on that mare's neck, feeling the shake come up through her hide into his palm, that he became aware of a man watching him through the far rails. He was an old man, or old enough, with a face like ground that had cracked and healed and cracked again and long past being surprised by weather. He had been standing there through the whole of the auction, and Hollis had not once noticed him, which afterward Hollis thought was the strangest part of the whole day. The 2 of them looked at each other across the pen for a while, and neither said anything, and then the old man put his hand once, briefly, on the top rail, the way a man touches a thing he is saying goodbye to, and spoke 4 words in English that were clear enough, and that Hollis did not understand at all. "They will remember you," he said, and then he turned and walked out of the agency yard, and Hollis Barrow stood in the mud with a dying mare shaking under his hand and $40 worth of grain to buy before dark, and had no notion whatever that he had just changed the entire remaining shape of his life. But every story starts a long way back of the scene it opens on, and to understand what the old man came to Hollis Barrow's gate to ask for a year later, and what it cost him to ask it, a person has to understand Barrow first. He had come into that basin 11 years before, with a wife named Mara, and a wagon carrying everything the 2 of them owned, which did not amount to much, and a belief that a man could build a lasting thing out of hard ground if he was stubborn enough and patient enough, and did not mind the work. He built the house himself, board by board, and the barn after it, and a life that fit him the way a good boot fits a foot that has walked a long way to earn it. Mara gave him 7 years of that life and a daughter, and then a fever came through the basin one February and took her in 9 days, and Hollis buried her under the cottonwood on the north line, where the ground stays soft, and in the 4 years since he had not once said her name aloud to a stranger, he raised the girl alone. Her name was Nell, and she was 9 years old that spring, and she had her mother's habit of asking a question that went straight to the bone of a thing, without meaning any harm by it. He worked the place mostly alone too, hiring on at branding and at roundup, and otherwise preferring his own quiet to another man's noise. Because a solitary man gets that way, and because grief carried long enough stops being a wound and becomes a kind of company. In the territory he was known as a fair man and a quiet one, a man who paid what he owed on the day he owed it and expected the same, and did not say much about it either way. If there was hardness in him, it showed only in how little he ever explained himself, and how seldom he changed his mind once it was made up. The East Range was the part of his place that nobody envied him. 4 sections of rolling grass broken by rock that would not take a plow and had never been much use for cattle, because the water on it was seasonal. And Hollis had run stock there in Mara's time, and had not run anything on it since, so that by that March, the grass on it stood 1.5 years deep and going to waste. And there was the well. His wife's father, dead now these 6 years, had shown him how to find the seam and where to sink for it, and it went down through 90 feet of hard country into rock that held water when the sky had given up on the basin entirely, and in the 3rd dry year, when men 20 miles off were hauling barrels from the river and losing stock at a rate that broke them. Barrow's well had not so much as dropped a foot. Grass nobody wanted, and water that did not fail. That was what Hollis Barrow had, and it was the entire reason that a pen of dying horses at an agency auction looked to him like a thing that could be fixed, rather than a thing that could not. As to how the horses came to be in that pen at all, the answer was neither simple nor short, and there was not a man in the territory who could have told it without leaving something out that mattered. The band had been moved twice in 6 years, off ground they had held since anybody could reckon, and each move had been made lawful by a paper, signed somewhere far off by men who had never seen the country they were dividing. The last move had put them on agency land above the Cibecue, where the grazing gave out in August, and when their horses came down onto the flats in the fall looking for feed, the agent had called it a violation, and a troop had come out and gathered the herd and driven it in, and the paperwork had said seized, and the men who did the seizing had said stolen back, and the band had said nothing at all, because by that year they had learned exactly what saying something got them. There was blood on both sides of that history, and there was no honest telling of it that put all the blame in one place. There had been raids, and there had been reprisals, wagons burned and camps burned, men killed on hillsides in the dark by other men who thought they had good reason, women buried a long way from where they were born, children taken off to schools that cut their hair and forbade their language. A man could spend a lifetime deciding whose grief weighed the heavier and come to the end of his life without an answer. And what mattered to Hollis Barrow, standing at that fence with his hat in his hand, was not the ledger of who owed what to whom, because he had never in his life been able to make that ledger balance and had stopped trying. What mattered was that 40 animals were dying slowly of hunger in a government pen, while he had 4 sections of grass standing untouched. There is an older law than any treaty ever written, and it says that a man does not let a creature starve within reach of feed he is not using. He had learned that law from his father in a wetter country a long way east, and he had never once found a reason good enough to set it aside. Not then, and not later, when the setting aside of it would have made his life considerably easier. It took 9 days to walk the herd the 22 miles home, because they could not be pushed, and would not have survived being pushed, and they did it in short stages with grain fed out morning and night from sacks Hollis had bought with money he had meant to spend on a new mower. 2 of the 40 did not make it, and he buried them where they went down, and the other 38 came up onto the East Range on the 10th morning and stopped at the top of the rise and stood there a long while looking at the grass in front of them without moving, which Nell, who had ridden out to see them come, said afterward was the strangest and best thing she ever saw in her life. They did not run at it. They walked down into it slowly, the way people walk into a church. By the end of April, the ribs had begun to go under. By June, you could not have picked them out of any other herd in the basin, except by the way they carried their heads. And by the way, in the middle of any afternoon, the whole 38 of them would lift together and look east at nothing a man could see. The talk started before the grass did. It started small, as talk in small country always does, and it grew teeth as it went. Word went round that Hollis Barrow had bought Apache horses, which was true, and then that he had bought them on somebody else's instruction, which was not, and then that he was holding them against the band's return, which was closer to true than Hollis would have admitted to anyone, and then that he was running guns, and that his well was a way station, and that a man who would buy those horses would as soon hand a rifle to the fellow who meant to use it on his neighbor's back. None of it was true, and every bit of it traveled anyway, because fear does not require truth to get where it is going. It only requires a willing mouth and a frightened ear, and in a country 3 years into a drought there was no shortage of either. Alvin Prosser, who kept the store in town and who had known Mara before Hollis had, told him the whole of it straight out across the counter one Saturday. Not because he believed any of it, but because he did not, and because he reckoned a man ought not to be ambushed by what is being said behind him. Hollis heard it out with no particular change in his face, and thanked him, and bought his flour, and rode home. But he sat a long while on the porch step that night after Nell was asleep, turning it over the way lonely men do, talking to the house because there was nobody else. They'll come round, or they won't, he said. Either way, the grass stays where it is. Nell asked him about it that week, riding out with him on her pony to check the north fence in the direct way she had. "Papa, is it true you bought the horses off the Apache?" "I bought them off the government," he said. The government had taken them off the Apache. That's the true way to say it, and it's why some folks are put out. "Are they going to come and get them back?" "I expect they'd like to. Would you let them?" And Hollis rode a while before he answered that one, because it was the question underneath all the other questions, and he had not until that moment said the answer even to himself. "They're not mine," he said at last. "I paid $80 to keep them alive. That's a different thing from owning them, and I'd thank you not to repeat that in town." It came to a head in the last week of June, in the white heat of a day with no wind in it, and it came the way that kind of thing usually comes, which is with 6 men who have talked each other into something over 3 days and cannot now be the first to say they have changed their mind. Rule Stagg rode in at the head of them with his rifle across the bow of his saddle and a paper in his coat that he had got from a stock inspector in Silver City who had never been within 40 miles of Barrow's East Range. "Glanders," the paper said. Suspicion of glanders in imported stock, and a recommendation, which is not an order, and Stagg knew it was not an order, that the herd be destroyed. There was no glanders in those horses, and every man riding with Stagg knew it. What there was 40 animals grazing in plain sight on the far side of a fence, reminding the whole basin every single day that Hollis Barrow had done a thing none of them would have done. Hollis came out of the barn and saw them and told Nell to go in the house and bar the door and open it for no voice but his. and then he walked out into the middle of his own yard with nothing in his hands at all. "You know what this is," Stagg said. "I know what it isn't," Hollis said. "It isn't glanders. It's a public danger. It's 38 head of horse eating grass I wasn't using, Rule, and you've eaten at my table, and I've pulled your calves out of my wash in the spring for 11 years. And I'd like you to say the actual thing out loud before you do it." And Stagg could not. He sat there with his jaw working and the rifle across his saddle, and could not say it, and it was while he was not saying it that the men behind him began, one at a time, to look past Hollis, up at the low ridge that closed the east side of the yard. There were riders on it. There were perhaps a dozen of them, sitting their horses spread out along the crest, with the white sky behind them, and they had not been there 4 minutes earlier, and no one had heard them come. Somebody's horse shifted. Somebody's hand went to his belt from old habit, and stopped there. And out of the middle of that line one rider came down the slope alone, at a walk, with his hands open and held out from his sides, and when he was close enough, Hollis saw that it was the old man from the agency fence. He came all the way down into the yard and stopped his horse, and got off it, slowly, both hands in sight the whole while, and walked past Hollis and straight up to the head of Rule Stagg's horse, close enough that if the rifle had come up and gone off it could not have missed, and stood there and looked up at him. "I am Kaita," he said. "Those are my people's horses, and that man bought them so that they would not die. If you wish to shoot something today, you may shoot me instead of them. I am 61 years old, and I have been shot at by better men than you, and it is not yet taken. Or you may go home to your supper, and in a week nobody will remember that you rode out here at all. There are moments, and they are rare in any life, when the whole weight of a thing turns not on who is stronger, but on which man is willing to be the first to set his fear down where everyone can see it." That was one of them. Stagg sat his horse a long time. Then he put the rifle back in its scabbard, and he said, to nobody, "Ah, hell." And he turned his horse and rode out of that yard without another word, and the 6 men with him went after him, and by nightfall the story was in town, and it was not the story any of them had ridden out expecting to bring back. Kaita stayed until dark. He sat on the porch step with a tin cup of coffee going cold in his hand, and watched the light go red over the east range where the horses were, and he did not say much for a long while, and Hollis did not press him, because there was in the old man's manner the sense of a decision that had not finished forming. You did not have to stand in your yard with nothing in your hands, Kaita said finally. "Didn't seem like a day for holding anything," Hollis said. Kaita made a small sound that was almost a laugh and was mostly not. "There is a rule among my people," he said. "My father taught it to me, and he taught it hard, after men who wore friendly faces walked soldiers up to our winter camp. He said, 'A kindness given once may be an accident. A kindness given twice may be a trap. Only a kindness that costs the giver something real and is given again after it has already cost him may be trusted.' Sounds like a hard way to go through life. It is why there is anyone left of us to go through life at all," Kaita said, without any apology in it. "I do not tell you this to make you feel the weight of it. I tell you so that you understand that what you did at that fence in March was seen, and what you did in this yard today was seen, and that in my language there is no word for a stranger who does both." He set the cup down on the step. "I will not ask you for anything tonight." And he did not, and he rode out with his riders before full dark, and Hollis Barrow went in and unbarred the door and told his daughter it was finished, and lay awake most of that night listening to the house tick. The blizzard came in the second week of January, out of a still white sky at noon, with no warning that anybody read in time, and by 3 in the afternoon a man could not see the barn from the kitchen window. Hollis had the stock in, and the doors wired shut, and was standing at that window with a cup in his hand when he saw, or thought he saw, something dark out on the flat past the north fence that was not a fence post and was not a cow. He stood there a full minute deciding whether he had seen it. Then he put the cup down and went for his coat. He would say afterward that it was the only genuinely brave thing he ever did in his life, by which he meant it was the only one he had time to think about beforehand, and did anyway. He took the big gray and a coil of rope and rode out into it with a bandana over his face and no visibility past his horse's ears, navigating by the fence line and by 12 years of knowing the ground, and he found them 400 yards out, an old woman down on her knees in the snow, and a boy of about 10 trying to lift her by one arm and getting nowhere, both of them so far gone with cold they had stopped shivering, which is the part that frightened him. He got the woman up across the front of his saddle with strength he did not know he still had at 38 years old, and he put the boy's hands on his stirrup leather and told him to hold on and run, and he brought them the whole 400 yards back at a walk, because he could not risk more, with the boy stumbling and holding, and the cold coming through Hollis's coat like it was. Cheesecloth. Nell had the fire built up and blankets down by the time he came through the door with them. It was 2 hours before either of them could speak, and near midnight before the old woman would take broth, and it was somewhere in there, sitting on the floor by the hearth with a blanket round his shoulders, that the boy told Hollis his name was Sanchi, and that the old woman was his great-grandmother, and that her name was Nalin, and that she was the mother of Kaita. Kaita came for them on the 3rd day when the drifts had settled enough to ride, and he came in through the door and saw his mother sitting up in Hollis Barrow's kitchen with a cup in her hands and his great-grandson asleep against her, and he stood in the doorway for a long moment without saying anything at all. "I didn't know who they were," Hollis said. "When I rode out. Wouldn't have made any difference. But I didn't know." "I know you did not know," Kaita said. "That is why it changes everything." They had been walking, he explained later, from the agency to a cousin's camp 40 miles on, because the agency's ration had been cut in November, and an old woman and a boy eat less on the road than in a place where they must be counted. He said it flatly, the way a man says a thing he has stopped being able to be angry about. And then he said thank you, once in English, and did not say it again, and took his mother home. That was January. The rest of that winter went by, and the spring, and the summer after it, and the horses on the East Range came into their second season fat and glossy, and 11 of the mares in foal, and the talk in the basin died down to nothing much the way talk does when a thing stops being new. And Rule Stogg, who never once apologized and never once referred to the day he rode into that yard, took to leaving a sack of feed on Barrow's gatepost 2 or 3 times a winter and riding off before anybody came out, which from a man like Stagg was a speech. It was the following March, a year almost to the day from the auction, that Kaita came up the road to Hollis Barrow's gate alone in the middle of the afternoon and got down off his horse and did not come in. Hollis came out and found him standing at the gate with his hat in his hands, which Hollis had never once seen, and understood before a word was said that something had changed, and that whatever it was had cost the old man a great deal to bring up that road. "There is ground on the blue," Kaita said. "The agent has agreed it. It is not our ground, but it is ground where the grass does not fail in August, and where they will let us alone, and we have until the 1st of May to be on it, and it is 160 miles. He stopped. He turned his hat around once in his hands. "We cannot make 160 miles in April with what we have. We have 9 horses for 104 people. There are children, and there are old ones, and there is my mother, who you know." He stopped again, and this was the part, and both men knew it was the part. "I am asking you for the horses," Kaita said. "I am asking. I have nothing to trade for them that you have not got more of, I have 17 silver conchos that were my father's, and I have my rifle, and I have my word. And I am standing at your gate with my hat in my hand, asking you for 40 head of horse, and I want you to know that I have not asked a white man for anything in 19 years, and that I would not be asking now for myself, and that if you say no, I will go back down this road, and we will walk, and some of us will not arrive." And Hollis Barrows stood there and looked at him, and what he thought about, he said many years afterward, was not the $80, and not the grain, and not the 2 winters of feed. What he thought about was that this man had come down off a ridge into a leveled rifle for him without being asked, and had never once in a year mentioned it. "Put your hat on," Hollis said. "You'll want it in the sun. They're your horses, Kaita. They've been your horses since March a year ago, and I only ever paid to keep them breathing. Bring your people up Thursday, and we'll cut them out together, and I'll send what feed I've got in the barn with you, and if you say one word to me about silver, I'll take it as an insult and we'll neither of us enjoy the rest of the afternoon." The old man did not answer for what felt to Hollis like a long time. Then he put his hat on, and he said, "Thursday," and got back on his horse, and rode home. And that would have been the end of it, and it would have been a decent enough end, except that it was not the end of it at all, because what a man of Kaita's rank does when a thing is given to him freely is not the same as what he does when a thing is sold to him. They came up on Thursday, 40 some of them, and the cutting out took 2 days. And on the evening of the second day the old man came and sat on Hollis Barrows' porch step for the last time. "I came here to beg for horses," he said. "You did not let me finish begging. So now you will listen to me, because I have thought about this since March and I have spoken to the elders, and it is decided, and you do not get to refuse it the way you refused the silver." He held up one finger. "The mares carry 11 foals. Every one of those foals is yours, and every second foal born to that herd, for as long as I am alive, brought to this gate in the fall, and after I am dead my sons will bring them, because they will have been told." A second finger. "You have 4 sections of grass, and a well that does not fail, and you do not know your own country. We were on that ground for a long time, before there was a fence on it. There is a second seam under the rock at the head of your east wash, and I will show you where, and I will show you which of your grass comes back after a burn, and which does not, and where the snow lies latest, and what the cottonwoods on your north line are telling you in a dry March. This is worth more than the horses. You will understand that in 10 years. A third finger. At your branding and at your roundup, every year you will have 6 men, and they will be my sons and my sons' sons, and you will not pay them, and you will not argue about it in front of them, because it will shame them." And then he put his hand down. "And the last thing is not a gift, and I cannot give it to you, because it is only a fact, and it has been a fact since the blizzard. My mother has told the band what she will tell it. You have a name among us now. I am not going to tell you what it is, because you would say it wrong, and because you do not need to carry it. But if you or that girl are ever anywhere between here and the blue, and you are in trouble, you say to whoever finds you that you are from the house where Nalin was warm. That is all you will need to say. That is what I came to give you, and it is why I let you see me with my hat in my hands, because a man cannot give a thing like that to somebody he has only traded with. It did not all come easy after that, and no honest telling of it would pretend otherwise. There were men in the basin who never came round, and 2 families who sold out and moved south rather than live near what they still called danger. There were people in Kaita's band who thought the arrangement bound them too close to a white man's fence, and said so. Rule Stagg took the better part of another year before he could sit at a fire with any of them without his hand drifting to his belt from old habit, though he did eventually sit, and eventually eat, and eventually, and this took longest of all, laugh at something Sanchi said. The foals came every fall, brought up the road in October by men who would not stay for supper the first 3 years, and would not leave without it after that. The second water seam was where the old man said it was, 11 feet down under the rock at the head of the wash, and it carried Barrow's place through 2 dry years that broke 4 of his neighbors. Hollis Barrow lived another 31 years on that ground. He saw Nell married and raising children of her own within sight of the cottonwood where her mother was buried, and he saw Sanchi grow into a man who came up that road every October with a foal on a lead rope, and then into an old man who sent his own grandsons with it. He never got rich, and never wanted to be. He told the story only rarely, and never to strangers who came around wanting a tale about savages and a brave man's rifle, because that was not what had happened, and he had no patience at all for the telling that made it so. When he did tell it, late in his life to grandchildren on cold evenings with the fire going, he told it the way it actually went. A pen of dying horses nobody would bid on. $80 he could not really spare, 4 words from an old man at a fence, and a year later that same old man standing at his gate with his hat in his hands, having come to beg, and going home instead having given away more than he came for. He said the part people always got wrong was thinking the story turned on the $80. It did not. It turned on a morning at a fence when he could have looked at 40 starving animals and seen whose they were instead of what they needed, and he had looked the other way round, and everything else in his life came out of that one small ordinary act of looking. So, if you ever find yourself standing at a fence somewhere, with something in front of you that needs help, and a crowd behind you that has already decided what helping it would make you, ask yourself only whether the thing in front of you is starving. Let that be the whole of your reckoning, the way Hollis Barrow let it be the whole of his, and see what comes up the road to your gate a year from now. If this one found something true in you, stay a while with us. Like it, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you would have done standing at that pen with $80 in your pocket and the whole territory watching.